Okay, how you doing so far?
Yep, we're good.
Okay,
We're supposed to
all right.
do till like 8 to 9.
Okay, we'll do it. We got plenty of material. Okay, so how do people lose control? Goodness. So substance abuse is the use of something to get you high. Usually they have a plan. They do what their friends do, and serious harm is rare. But it results in hangovers and periods of dysphoria, and it tends to happen less often and seem less attractive over time because of the diminishing euphoric effects. The euphoria fades away, the bad effects build up, and most people figure out, hey, this isn't working, let's not do this anymore. So addiction is the repetitive loss of control. We have 3 different types. People use a little bit, lose their inhibitions, and go overboard. And if they do that more than a couple of times, it's a binge type of addiction. And then we got the tension type, where people build up tensions and feel like they got to wash it out of their system. And then the repetitive type. Most people have a mixture. You hear all kinds of things about addiction. Some of it has a grain of truth, and some of it might be hogwash. So what does science tell us? Science tells us that addiction is a process that takes place in the brainstem. The brainstem adapts to the substance. People feel terrible, and to escape that, they're in a Faustian bargain, where in order to avoid feeling terrible, they are compelled to use the drug. So we're learning to combine our strategies, and you remember when Clinton ran for office?
Economy.
Right, exactly. I'm telling you, it's the brainstem. Now, the brainstem will take over. For example, if I tell you, hold your breath for 2 minutes, I'll give you $5. You might start out thinking, oh, yeah, $5, great, I can do that, no problem. But about 30, 45 seconds into it, the brainstem is going to start to squawk. And pretty soon, it's going to take over. And the value of that $5 is going to diminish. And this is what happens in an addiction. The value of abstinence diminishes as withdrawal intensifies. And this happens with all kinds of things, diets, budgets. And basically, yeah, you can make plans in your cortex, but in the end, the brainstem will take over. So what's it like to be inside the mind, looking out through that window of sensation and perception at the outside world? Then you have all these different trains of thought competing for your attention. Ordinarily, when we consider these ideas, we weigh them. Libra is the scales. So to deliberate literally means to weigh these ideas. To decide is to cut off, like homicide, suicide. So we're like a little traffic cop inside our mind, and we cut off the ideas that we don't like. And ordinarily that works pretty well. But when we get overly excited, we get sucked into a train of thought. There really are monsters in the closet, and we lose it. We become a hood ornament on a runaway train of thought. Okay, so again, we have these trains of thought, and people have had these for thousands of years. So we can identify them. The desire to be safe, it gives us our conscience. We got pride in the intellect. We got willpower or anger, and we got joy. This is lemonade. So here's our young man and his personal reality simulator. The window to the outside world, the cone of his attention, and the different types of trains of thought that might attract his attention. And you can see that he's tuned us out. He's tuning into something inside his head. So each of these trains of thought has a life cycle. So how does that work? The brain's a hollow ball. When different sources in the brainstem tickle the cortex, ripples spread out and develop into our ideas. And ordinarily, we might think about one, conscious evaluation. We might decide not to do it because of some reason, and we just think about it. And on the other hand, we might decide to actually do something, like get up, go to the refrigerator, get some coffee. Oh, good, you were listening. Good. And what do? If we're good at it, it's left foot, left foot. And again, the basal ganglia, where habit lives, takes over. And we just pad on over to the refrigerator to get our coffee. And so when we're calm, this works pretty well. We can think about things and act out of habit. We can drive down the freeway and think about what's for dinner, okay? And when we get overly excited, we lose it. So ordinarily, there's a balance between thinking about things in the frontal lobes and acting out of habit in the brainstem, the basal ganglia. Thinking about things, acting out of habit. Thinking about things, acting out of habit. Well then, when we get overwhelmed, when we get that surge of dopamine or adrenaline, it suppresses frontal lobe activity and reason shrinks to far away, and the present moment we react to the situation. This is what happens when somebody says snake or fire or kill him, or when somebody tells a funny story. And this is how people lose it. So this inner life that we have is a dialogue between different desires. And they are sponsored by structures in the brainstem. The amygdala sponsors our desire to be safe and our determination. The frontal lobes help to facilitate our pride and intellect, our reason. And the reward activation system helps to sponsor joy. So we have different degrees of activation, thinking about it, anticipation with internal tension, and crisis. And these movies in our head follow a script. And the hot thoughts, like snake, move us from thinking up to crisis fairly rapidly. So one of the advantages of the thought record is that it helps people to find the hot thought. So we can use symbols to represent these different types of desires. We've got, for example, people that play it safe all the time, so we call them squares. Okay? Got people that are in charge, they've got a sense of direction, they've got a lot of pride. We've got people with the fire inside, willpower, and that glow of joy. And these things are always varying in intensity, just like we saw with the brain waves. And so if you take fear, for example, when people get scared, they get tense, they get a tremor, they sweat, and of course they get tension in the buttocks, which is why the root chakra is down there. And we have different degrees of activation. The conscience at work in the background, you should slow down to help all the people in the neighborhood feel relaxed and calm. Good conscience. You have anxiety and dread, oh my gosh, what if they catch me speeding? You know. Then you got panic, they're right behind me, oh God. Okay, am I right? Different degrees of activation, same thing. Now the amygdala, you can see here's the brainstem in this picture here. Here's the cortex on the outside. These little blue spots is the amygdala, and they're right on these fibers that connect the brainstem with the cortex. So they can light up the whole network.
So there's two. The amygdala isn't two, it's too small.
Yes, too small, yeah. In fact,
nodes
it's,
or-
yeah, these little blue balls there, and they're shaped like an almond. And an almond, I don't know how that amygdala means almond. A-L-M-O-N-D,
Okay.
a type of nut.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's your amygdala. And so it also is active in anger, which gives us that fire inside. And again, you have different degrees of activation. We'll do it tomorrow. And then get her done. And get out of my way, you fool. Different degrees of activation, same energy. And then we've got joy. So again, in our diagram of the brainstem, we've got the amygdala down here, the yellow thing that sends adrenaline to suppress frontal lobe activity. The reward activation system sends dopamine to the frontal lobe, which is what enables us to react to urgent situations. So the reward activation system, and again, this is review, gives us that glow of happiness. So we can use a circle. dull, dim, gray, bored teenager. Happy, normal, giddy, silly, goofy, out of control. And then we've got reason, which is between the brainstem and the frontal lobes. Think about it, plan, pride. Have brain fog Monday morning, up and at it, really on top of it. So these different types of trains of thought are sponsored by different structures and different neurotransmitters. And many of the drugs of abuse imitate these neurotransmitters, which can influence then what's on TV, basically, how intense a particular one of these is. Yes?
So, the amygdala being the will, so people say I can do it with willpower, they're fighting the entire brainstem with the almond side. Is that fair to say, or am I off?
No. What happens is we actually don't have much in the way of willpower. We have momentary won't power. We have the ability to pause and do something else. But what happens is, if, say I struggle to control my temper, okay, I will not get angry. Well, I'm using willpower to try to control my will. So I'm basically trying to use gasoline to put out a fire. And then I end up with more and more willpower fighting itself, kind of like pushing the accelerator and the brakes at the same time, until I blow up. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I prefer a more strategic approach to get people to recognize, yeah, you're going to have these impulses. What you want to do is pause and redirect, just like you would with a toddler. Again, when one of those types of trains of thought is stirred up, we lose it. And so we can measure those dopamine surges by putting our microcatheter right here. And we observe that the dopamine surges are less and less and less because we've got the endorphin effect of opiates, we've got the dynorphin effect of all euphorogenic substances. They start out like this, they end up like this. And until they get some experience, they're unaware of that burnt out feeling, that empty gray sock feeling. But you'll even hear the teenagers when they're talking about their pot, I'm so burnt out. Yeah. And so, yeah, the high goes away. And we can use this diagram to illustrate how big that glow of joy is and look at what happens now with the whole brainstem. Take cocaine, marijuana, nicotine. At first, people get a buzz, and then with repeated use, they feel normal. And then when they go into withdrawal, they have decreased joy, brain fog, and this causes there to be a relative increase in anxiety and irritability. It's like, this is what's on TV, anxiety and irritability. So your smoker that can't get a cigarette, what's the nicotine fit? The nicotine fit is increased anxiety and irritability. You take your teenager and hide their pot, you're gonna find anxiety and irritability.
And then you laugh at them.
If you're bigger than them, which I happen to be, so I have a lot of fun. And so then take alcohol. Alcohol, at first people get a buzz. The euphoria from alcohol actually fades pretty rapidly. But then what happens? Alcohol suppresses the anxiety. See how that square is just a little bit smaller? So the brain compensates by increasing glutamate. And then during alcohol withdrawal, you not only have that dead inside bored feeling and brain fog, you also have this driving anxiety, which in severe cases can lead to the tremor, hallucinations, seizures, and delirium. Then the opiates dampen the extra adrenaline. So in opiate withdrawal, we have the dysphoria, and then this adrenaline-driven anxiety and irritability. And so we can see why people lose it. The common states, nicotine, cocaine, marijuana, is not as dramatic as these, but it's the same basic deal. Then what happens is that we adjust to our environment, whether it's internal or external, by pulling recipes out of our DNA. If I take somebody from Louisiana, I bring them up to Wisconsin, they shake and shiver, they wear 8 coats, they use 9 blankets, everybody laughs at them, and then eventually they adapt. We send them back down to Louisiana for a couple of years, bring them back up, and they adapt much more quickly, because the useful recipes get a bookmark. Normal DNA has a methyl group that likes oil, so it coils up tightly. The epigenetic mark is an acetyl group which likes water. So that bit of DNA stays fluffy, ready to be decoded whenever it's called for. So you can take somebody, dry them out, take away the alcohol, take away the opiates, they go back to normal function. Then you add alcohol and, oh yeah, I got this recipe right here, and before you know it, they're back to craving, and rapidly they've adjusted to the alcohol again, and they start having severe withdrawal symptoms after just a few days.
And epigenetic markers is a huge factor in explaining to people why you can't go back to 1 or 2 drinks after you've been abstinent for a while.
Yeah.
You know, it's in the DNA.
Yeah, it'll sneak up on you. And this is a good way of describing the disease model. I prefer to look at addiction as just altered function. So we'll look at cravings, top down, bottom up, similar states. Yep. The emotional scripts that come up, how to become aware of them. I like the idea of psyche as to cool, and to teach people how to avoid losing it, and then how to edit those emotional scripts and learn different techniques of mindfulness to improve their self-control.